Mundo.
Okay.
I move that we approve Mark Zappa as the registered agent for Zappa and Zappa and Hudson, located at 726 6th Street North.
Second.
Any questions regarding the request to change agents?
What is it gonna be called? Is this for both of them? This is just Muds and Suds, not the Cozy Corner. That's a separate one.
Right.
This one is for Muds and Suds, the next one is for Idaho Chucks.
Okay. Do you want to just summarize what the nature of this change is?
Basically, what it does is it changes the agent from Paul Rohde to Mark Zappa. He oversees all the alcohol purchasing, make sure everybody's licensed, the operators are in there and running smoothly. And
Okay.
I think he's more than capable of handling that task.
Okay.
Wouldn't count on it.
Oh, well, fortunately, we don't have to vote on that. All right. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. All right, and again, Xander Inc. doing business as Idaho Chucks, Class B change of agent. Chair would entertain a motion to approve.
I would so move. Here we have move to approve Mark Zappa as registered agent for Xanor Inc. at Idaho Chucks, located at 708 6th Street North.
I'll second.
Any comments or questions?
So what is the name of the place gonna be? I know this doesn't really matter, but it's not Idaho Chucks anymore, but it says that under line 4.
we are approving, we had a request to change agents, and at that point, that's all we're doing, and Xander Inc. has to be the benefiting holder of the license, and so if they put a partnership together to call it Cozy Corner or Timbuktu, they can do that, but at that time, I will change the name of the establishment, but they have to resubmit the paperwork giving it the new name.
Okay, we don't have to
And we have to have a seller's permit in that name, so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the next month's.
All right, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Plan Commission, there's no one here from the Plan Commission,
They didn't meet.
okay. There was no meeting in August.
Correct.
So no reports, okay. Finance Committee, claims. The Finance Committee met earlier, and the Finance Committee recommended recommended approval of the non-reoccurring claims totaling for the month of August, totaling $26,128.63. So I will entertain that, or I will make that motion. Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions regarding any of the claims? All right. Since that's a spending decision, we'll do a roll call vote. We'll start on this end. Joe?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Larry, yes. Sandra?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Okay, the recommendation has been made to increase the annual, or the 6-month retainer fee for the animal warden, and increasing it from $250 to $300, and that is for a 6-month period. Annualized, it would be $100. The Finance Committee is recommending doing that. Finance Committee is recommending approval. Hang on. Go ahead.
I would so move to increase the animal control warden service retainer fee from $250 to $300 retroactive to January 1st, 2008.
I'll second.
Okay, any comments or questions? All right, again, suspending, so we'll do another roll call. Start on this end again. Joe?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Larry, yes. Sandra?
Yes.
Yes.
Mark? The next, one, two, D, E, F, and G are all related to the library agreement. Now, obviously, later on, we will take specific action on that, on each of those items. And then I also have a brief PowerPoint presentation just to try and tie the whole thing together, and then we'll come back and approve the specific actions. Under H, which is authorization to solicit loans for purchase of a generator, the Finance Committee recommended tabling that action until we've actually got the bids back. Okay. Just felt it'd be a little premature to solicit loans. Okay. Generator, the purchase of the generator is primarily driven by the fact that we are an emergency management center. And in the event of a catastrophe, not unlike what's happening down south, as well as what happened in Hugo, this facility would need to be continued to operate, which would mean everything in here plus potentially additional. So, all right. So there won't be. Okay, since the Finance Committee has recommended tabling action on that, I don't believe the board has to take an action on that. Am I correct? Okay.
Right.
The 2009 preliminary budget, just for purposes of discussion, over the weekend, Gloria had sent you a current draft of where we're at. We've obviously been trying to accelerate the process, primarily related to the whole prospect of the library proposal. Our target would still be to approve the budget at the first meeting in November. Now, you were going to check dates. Is November 4 by any chance the
That's
first?
the election date. So we should probably, in case of the referendum, we should have it for maybe the day or two after the election anyway.
Okay, because November 4 is the first Tuesday of the month.
Right.
So should we meet on Thursday the 4th?
The
Or, I
6th.
mean, the 6th?
Sure.
How does that fit with everybody's schedule? Okay. So the November board meeting will be November 6th. And presumably the Finance Committee will meet at 6 o'clock, board at 7. Okay. All right. Let's see. Are we fired up there? Okay. Where is the appropriate place to be? Or
We can't, we're gonna be able to give you a better idea where you can get you on video.
The cable guy.
You know, for the last couple of meetings, we've been talking about the so-called library project. So I thought it would be useful to create a presentation, which hopefully we'll get through here in 10 to 15 minutes. It kind of ties all of the various pieces together. What I'm going to do very quickly is go to the end.
That was fast.
This is the second to the last slide. It actually might serve purposes of why this is a fairly complex, multifaceted project. It is because you've got 4 municipalities who are involved, each who have differing issues associated with doing something like this. There is an uncertainty about the ongoing availability of the target building. For example, if Excel came up to us tomorrow and said, oh, by the way, we just got an offer from somebody, from Jim over here to buy the building for $1.50 more than you guys currently have on the table, and it's a non-contingent offer. Can you match it? The answer is no. So that's part of the issue. For a $10 million project, this has certainly been a very fast-paced schedule, starting back in February when we first were introduced to the proposal from the foundation and the library board. It involves a lot of challenging fundraising targets with the foundation itself. Certainly the whole concept of the 50-50 public-private financial terms and conditions, and what does that mean from the time we first started the project until today, that certainly has evolved. There will be a requirement for a capital cost referendum issues. Now, those are both practical as well as procedural, which means, you know, part of the reason why this whole thing has to be accelerated is in order to put it on the November ballot, it means we've got to get it to the county clerk at least 42 days prior to that. The same thing with the levy override issues. Now, one other issue which is here, but which at least right now we don't know there's no way of dealing with it, is the fact that the levy limits are scheduled to expire in November of 2009 unless the state legislature elects to continue the levy limits as they are, or they could do whatever they wanted to, which could say we're going to put in newer ones, and certain other provisions could even be retroactive. Now, I don't know that they've ever done retroactivity on levy limits or something, but you know, that at least is an issue. And then last item is, in terms of just as a discussion from the time this project started, we really have not had any other real options to consider. So now I'll just come back to the beginning. Okay. First of all, you know, as we go through this presentation, there are really 3 players other than the taxpayers who ultimately pay for the things. And I want to just deal with that in terms of what are their roles and responsibilities. Very quickly do a little bit of background. Why are we talking about this at all tonight, and why have we been talking about it? What specifically has been proposed by the Library Foundation and Library Board? What will the cost be? What actions are required to make this project go? Number 6, what does the village board has to act on tonight, and why do we need to do that? And then I've just got a few summary comments. Gloria, in the back room, I've got copies of this presentation.
Okay.
So if you want to give those to the board, so as I'm going through, if you have any comments, and give one to John and Kathleen as well. All right. The 3 primary players are associated with this. The first one would be the partners, who are the 4 municipalities who are currently involved with the library, which includes the city of Hudson, the village of North Hudson, the township of Hudson, and the township of St. Joe. What is our collective role and responsibility in this whole process? We are the owners or the landlords of the buildings, or at least we would be going forward. The partners pay for the operating costs via property taxes. They decide how many dollars annually go to the library for operating costs, and also now must approve any capital projects. Okay? The library board is a group which consists of the 6 appointed representatives from the partners. 3 of those currently are from the city. 2 of them are from the township, and the other partners each have 1. Okay? Then there's 1 from the school district. A library board, in case you're wondering why it even exists, it's a state requirement. There's a statute that said if you decide you want to jump out of the county library system like we did many, many years ago and create your own local library, then you have to have a library board. The duties for that board are essentially prescribed by law. They are the day-to-day operators of the library, and they decide annually how to allocate the dollars once they are provided by the various funding municipalities. That is also a state statute. Once we give them the money, they decide how it's going to be spent. They tell us how that's going to happen by submitting their budget. Then there's the Hudson Area Library Foundation, sometimes known as HAF. They exist for the purpose of raising funds and supporting the library activities, but they are independent of the partners and the library board. Okay? And they've also been in existence for a long period of time. Okay. Now, why are we talking about this project at all? 2 reasons. Number 1, the library board and the foundation have been talking about and recommending building or acquiring, whichever might suit everybody's purposes best, a larger space for the library for the past couple of years. The current library is about 8,000 square feet. In July of 2006, the foundation funded a needs assessment, space needs assessment, which indicated the facility of approximately 31,000 square feet would be appropriate for a facility, or for a community of our size, community meaning the 4 municipalities. 8,000 square feet is too small for a community our size, which is part of the rationale that was in that report. The current space limits the number of circulations available. For example, if you want to add 1 now, you have to take 1 out, literally, because the space is limited. There is no storage space for incoming periodicals, books, etc. And the space doesn't allow for what some would consider the 21st century library services, which would clearly contain more access to databases as well as just additional circulation materials, which would be books, periodicals, etc. The other reason why we're talking about this is because in 2007, I believe that's the year, the NMC building became available. And in February of 2008, the library board and HAF made a proposal to the partners. Okay? And what was that proposal? Very simply, it says as follows. We collectively would buy and convert the NMC building to a library. The ownership and the governance would remain the same. Nothing is going to change in that respect. Now, the terms and conditions get clarified with the new joint library agreement in terms of the relationship of the 4 partners as well as between the 4 partners and the board. But there's never been a suggestion to change the ownership or governance model for the library. Why this particular building? Well, one is location, obviously. It's on the river, which certainly makes it attractive, makes it a very attractive location. It's near the FIPS, which would centrally locate the so-called cultural activities for the municipalities, and it's centrally located. There would be some who would argue that just because of the hills, it is not as accessible for people with handicaps or disabilities, but as a location, it certainly is a desirable one. The building size in the report indicated that it was certainly adequate for current and future needs. The building itself is 40,000 square feet, 33,000 of which would be finished according to the proposal. There's the architectural appeal of the building itself, and presumably it would be cheaper than buying land and building a new structure elsewhere. Now, that's obviously an assumption, okay, in the sense that We really have not looked hard at what would a building cost, what would it cost if you were to buy another type of building. And then the fourth item is that we would split the capital cost 50-50. Capital cost means the cost to buy it, renovate it, and equip it, and get it ready to, boom, become a library, okay? The partners would fund 50%, and the foundation would raise 50% in donations or philanthropic means, okay? Now, what would it cost to do this thing? There are two kinds of costs. First is capital costs, which is the money necessary to buy it, renovate it, and then furbish it, and everything else associated with that. You know. And then there's the ongoing operating costs. Now, the one thing I do want to point out is the costs that I'm going to be showing tonight, and if anybody wants to challenge them, feel free to do so, because these numbers have been changing almost every 14 days. But the costs shown here are independent of whatever might happen at the school district, the county, state, or WITC, who are also taxing authorities regarding property taxes. And theirs may go up or down, which could in turn increase or decrease the impact of this proposal in terms of what's it going to do. So all this proposal that I can talk about tonight is just the impact of this proposal. So I'll use current year dollars to say, okay, what would be the cost difference, okay? The timing of these costs is a little fluid because it depends upon the project timetable, which at the end I'll deal with that. The one thing I do want to point out is that neither the operating costs nor the capital costs will hit in 2009 for the simple reason we simply can't do the project fast enough, okay? All right, the capital costs. The project as currently proposed is at $10 million. Back in February, the proposal said it would cost 9.6. The increase is simply due to cost, delay, and inflation. Delay and inflation are the two primary things that have driven the cost. From a breakout perspective, the building and the land would be $3.3 million, converting it $2.5 million. Architectural and engineering fees, $300,000. Other fees, $120,000. So to put the building in place and have it ready to open the doors would cost about $6.2 million. Then you've got to furnish it, equip it, increase the collections, moving costs. That's an additional $1.8 million. So that brings you to about $8 million. And boom, you got a library ready to go. Okay. Then there are other contingencies, other costs and contingencies, which are currently forecasted or projected to be about 1.9. So you end up with a cost, if you add that up, to be $10 million. Now, these costs all of these costs have been developed by BKV Group, which is the architectural firm who originally designed the NMC building, as I believe. They are the ones who drafted the proposed, how would you convert this building into a library? And that's what they do for a living, so hopefully it's correct. Also with input from the library board in terms of what would we want to do, how would we offer services within the building, etc. And the library staff have been the primary contributors to where did these numbers come from. Okay?
Great. The other costs and contingencies,
Yes.
what, for example, are those?
Sure. If I don't have it in this brief handy dandy, I sure have it in the back. And that's a fair question, so I just apologize for not having the answer ready to go on that. I should have. The other project costs would contain campaign-related expenses, fundraising campaign costs. Would be the cost of a fundraiser. Project contingencies, $900,000, or approximately that amount. And that would be for things not unlike what we experience here in the village, which is, whoops, we forgot X. So X needs to be there. Okay. Some amount for inflation, construction financing, and I believe reimbursement of the city for donated funds. Okay. The city, in terms of just what that is, when the current library was started, the city of Hudson had $241,000 approximately of assets that they then in turn turned over to the library. Operating costs. By comparison to 2008 budget, which is the year we're in now, the library budget is $609,663. Operating costs in the first full year of operation following moving into the new facility would be $1,150,000, which is an increase of $540,000 per year, and that, of course, would go on indefinitely. Now, it's important to recognize that this cost, okay, is not going to show up in 2009 or even in 2010. The current timeline would say that the building would probably be open about mid-2011. So 2012 would be the first year now. I put that out there for informational reasons. At the end of the day, it's still going to cost, a lot more to operate this much larger facility. And if you look down below here, it says, why is the cost going up so much? Number one, it's a much larger building, okay? So that in turn is going to drive significantly increased utilities, maintenance, insurance, repairs, and all the other costs. No different than if you moved out of a 1,200 square foot house and you moved into a 7,000 square foot house. You're not going to heat it and have electricity, and maintenance costs are not going to be the same. They're just going to be a lot higher. And this is a fairly large structure. The other reason it's going to be more expensive is the current arrangement between the library board and the city, and from a rental perspective, is a very, very attractive arrangement today. There's no question about that. The library pays $50,000 a year. It's an all-inclusive lease. So utilities are included in that $50,000. The rent is included to the extent maintenance or repairs need to be done to the building. That's paid for by the city of Hudson. Okay. So it's an unusual and very attractive current arrangement that we have. Now, to the extent that we'll have a much larger facility, we will be increasing circulation. The expectation is you'd have increasing circulation. Circulation is what I call a library term for transactions, renting books or for whatever reason people come in and out of a library for. There will obviously be significantly greater increased expenditures for books, materials, and databases. For example, right now, if you're looking for financial databases, they're not available down there. We don't currently have the funding to provide access to, say, Dun & Bradstreet or Moody's. Okay. And then, of course, there would be more staff in the larger library. Okay. So those are the primary cost drivers. Okay. Now, what would it cost village taxpayers? Okay. Starting up here at the top. Oops. I'll get there. The project itself is $10 million. The partners' cost would be $5 million. That would be split among the partners as follows. And this is based on population. And so the village's portion would be 13.51%. Oops, sorry. The city of Hudson pays 43% in change. Town of Hudson, 28. Town of St. Joe, 14. Village, 13. So you take that $5 million and you just divide it by those percentages, and it says the capital cost for the village to buy into this portion would be $675,500. Now, you would subtract from that less any impact fees that have been collected and/or other credits. Now, we don't have any credits, but we have had over here library impact fees for over a decade. So we have been accumulating those dollars and saving them for specifically this purpose. And right now, it's about at $29,000. So at the time we would borrow the money, would we actually go out and borrow $675,500? The answer is no. We'd use that 29 to bring that number down. In fact, we have to do that, as would the city of Hudson, who's also been collecting impact fees. Their number is bigger because their impact fees are bigger, and I think they've also been collecting them for a longer period of time. But that's the amount of cost to the village as a whole to do this project. Now, for all of the rest of the presentation, because the $29,000 for in our case is not a significant part of the total, I'm just going to work off the assumption that $675,500 is the amount that we would have to borrow or request that the residents approve us borrowing to do this deal. Okay. The village long-term debt assumptions. We said, okay, we're going to finance $675,000 at 4.5% for 20 years, with 2 payments per year. That would be a payment per year of $50,443 or thereabouts. Now, when the time actually comes to borrow the money, interest rates could be higher or lower. Okay, but at least for now, 4.5% is the number that we have been kind of kicking back and forth and using on all of our assumptions, whether it's here or in our joint meetings. So obviously that interest rate assumption could change at the time when we actually borrow funds, which could be probably as early as fourth quarter '09. Okay. And if things went on a really good track, we might incur the debt in '09. Payments would actually begin in 2010. Okay. Taxpayer implications for the long-term debt. That $50,443 per year in payments that we have to make, if you divide that by the current assessed value of the village, which is $362 million and change, that translates to $13.92 per 100,000 of assessed value. And obviously that would require taxpayer approval. So now if you look at just the long-term debt, if you had a $100,000 house, your taxes, just for purposes of borrowing this, would go up $13.92. If you got a $300,000 house, it'd go up $41.76. If you got a $500,000 house, it'd be $69. If you got $1 million house, it'd be $139. That's just the cost associated with the debt. Okay. Could it be a little higher, a little lower? Sure. Just depends on what the interest rates are going to be and when you do it. Okay. The second part of the cost is operating cost. The village today currently spends $70,000 per year to fund its portion of the library. Once the building is completed, everybody has moved in, the annualized operating cost for us would be $155,405, which is an increase of $85,379 per year. Okay, and that dollar amount would obviously continue indefinitely. Now that $85,379 per year equals $23.58 per 100,000 of assessed value. Now, from a timing perspective, the library wouldn't be expected to be occupied till like mid-2011. So in 2011 is the first time you'd see about half of that impact hitting the tax rolls, with the full impact showing up in 2012. And obviously this also requires voter approval. Because this dollar amount here, just to kind of put that in perspective, we have talked about the possibility of adding one additional person to the PD. That would cover that cost, okay? Combined with the village portion of long-term debt, if you take the, it'd be $23.58 would be the cost per per $100,000 of assessed value. For operating costs, $13.92 for incurring the debt. So you'd have a total impact on the taxpayers of $37.50 per $100,000 of assessed value. And then if you want to look at that in the context of, okay, now that you combine the two, and you notice in this particular slide, this is combined, okay? So if you had a $100,000 house, it would increase your taxes by, $37.50 for this project. Now, how it would fit in at the time, who knows? Could be the only increase you see in the taxes, and it could be just one of 3 or 4. If you have a $300,000 house, it could be $112.50 a year. If you got a $400,000 house, it'd be $150 a year. If you got a $600,000 house, it'd be $225. If you got $1 million property, it's $375. Okay. So at least now we've got a chance to say, okay, we know what the project is. What's it going to do to us as taxpayers? Okay. And ultimately, taxpayers will decide. Okay. Now, what kind of actions are needed to make this project go or continue on as is? First of all, the 4 partners have to approve the major capital project proposal by September 20th. And the reason for the September 20th date is it links to the timing necessary if you want to do a referendum. If the partners haven't agreed by September 20th as to how the financial terms and conditions are going to be handled, then it's too late to take it to referendum. It's that simple. Okay. And the major capital project proposal, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later on, just so you understand what's involved in that creature. The 4 partner municipalities have to approve the 3, or I call them the procedural resolutions. If you want to do a resolution in the state of Wisconsin, or if you want to do a referendum in the state of Wisconsin, you got to have 3 types of resolutions, 1, 2, and 3. And they got to look like this, okay? And that's how you get them on the ballot. Okay, so those have to be done. Voter approval of the 2 referendum questions on November 4. Obviously, the residents have to say, yeah, we're prepared to assume this increased level of taxation in order to support this project. The other thing that half has to do is they have to complete an authorized, which means that the partners would have a chance to review that purchase agreement. So they would have to complete that purchase agreement regarding the NMC building itself. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit more about the mechanics of the ownership of the building in just a little bit. Half has to raise $4 million by no later than December 2009. Okay, for a couple of practical reasons. One is for planning, and one is for operational. From a planning perspective, this project, like any project, can't just kind of hang out there forever. Okay. Secondly, that building is not going to be there forever. So either this thing stays on track and gets moving, or it just isn't going to happen, okay? Because you can't assume the building's going to sit there vacant forever. And then the other thing that needs to happen is that the NMC building remains available even after the voter approval and during the half fundraising activities. As I pointed out here below, if you say what could go wrong with this whole scenario, is even after November, somebody could excel an offer for the building that they find more attractive. They might give us an option to counteroffer. We would not be in a financial position to do that. We'd lose the building, and the whole project is off. Okay. Village board actions anticipated tonight or requested. We need to request, it's actually 5 separate documents. The first one is to reapprove the revised Hudson Area Joint Library Agreement. I've got some detail on that, so I won't explain that in major detail right now. Then there's the major capital project proposal. Again, I've got some detail on that, so I won't bore you with that. And then procedurally, we have to pass Resolution 208-7. And this is kind of strange. It's where the board approves borrowing $675,500 to do the project. Then we approve Resolution 208-8, which is where the village board approves to exceed its own levy limit by 7% on this line item. Then the next resolution is where the board approves having a referendum on November 4, so the voters can approve what we just approved. Okay? But that's the process. So then, now 6 is not really a separate, it's an attachment to to item number 5, resolution 28, and that's then to approve the actual ballot and referendum questions. Okay. Summary of the 5 documents. Again, the Hudson Joint Area Library Agreement. The JLA, as it's called, is totally independent of the proposed project. This project just demonstrated the need for us to collectively update it. We've done that. There have been some changes since last month. Most of it is, by and large, I would not call material, but nevertheless, because there were changes, I want everybody to see the document as it is so we can re-vote on it tonight. What that document does is simply perpetuates the existing library agreement. That's really what it does. It clarifies the relationship between the 4 municipal partners. It also clarifies the relationship between the partners and the library board. It was previously approved at our August meeting, and there have been minor language changes, so I would just as soon do it now and reapprove it rather than just make any kind of summary judgment on my part alone. Some of the highlights in terms of what's in that joint library agreement. Number 1, it establishes that the library board governs the library and the funds allocated to it, which is a state statute. And that's the same as our prior agreement. It's not a change. And, of course, it reconfirms that the library board may not levy taxes, borrow funds, or incur unfunded liability beyond the current year without approval by the 4 municipalities. It also clarifies that any acquisition of land or building or a building lease of more than 5 years by the library board requires approval by the 4 municipalities. That kind of language just wasn't there before, okay, and it needed to be there. All major capital proposals require a written plan. The plan must be approved by the 4 municipalities to the extent that well, for example, we're dealing with obviously a major capital proposal right now, and those project costs are allocated based on population. The old agreement called for costs to be allocated based on assessed values, which really didn't make any sense because people use libraries, and using the assessed values doesn't make sense, particularly when you've got Hudson, who's got an awful lot more commercial property, which has no bearing, potentially no bearing on a library. Okay. It also did not change the distribution of the cost hardly at all. I think ours went from our currently would be 13.51, and historically we would have had 13.47, something like that. So I mean, it's a minuscule change, and that was just a fluke. And so that will change over time as populations change. The annual library budget must be prepared by September 1 of each year and submitted to the 4 municipalities. So that will then allow us to tie into our budgeting process. The annual cost of operations would again be allocated by population. Any increase in the library budget versus the prior year requires approval by all 4 municipalities. Okay. The city will continue to act as the personnel and fiscal agent as they have done in the past. There are provisions that said should the city step out of that role, we now have a mechanism to allow that to happen. The library employees will continue to be employees of the city of Hudson. Prior to the approval of a major capital project, which is obviously why we're here, any municipality may withdraw membership with 1 year's notice. Okay, this is now prior to a capital project, right? Now, nobody has given notice, so it's too late. Now, after a major capital project, particularly given the size of this one, we have modified it that says you're in for 25 years. And if you do want to get out at the end of 25 years, it takes 5 years' notice, and you also give up your right to the equity you have in the building and properties. Okay? Then there's the major capital project proposal, which is, that really defines the financial terms and conditions associated with purchasing or renovating the building based on the initial proposal of a 50-50 public-private cost sharing. What are the highlights? And I've broken this into a couple different sections. First is the process of actually buying the building. How would we do that? Okay. The partners will form a tenants in common agreement or something like that to create a holding entity. And that holding entity would acquire, renovate, and then in turn lease the NMC building back to the library board. Half, the foundation, will secure an option to purchase the NMC building through September 30th, 2009. the goal there is to try and take the building off the market at a cost not to exceed $3.3 million. Why? Because that's the number we got in the budget for the building cost, subject to the following contingencies. There will certainly be the normal kind of contingencies associated with any kind of a real estate transaction. For example, we'd want to have the property inspected to make sure there was no hazardous waste buried under the parking lot. This particular agreement, which we would be dealing with tonight, the approval of this agreement by the four partners, and then the voter approval related to financing and levy override. Okay. So even though we approve this major capital proposal, that doesn't guarantee it's going to happen. It just simply says, if everything goes right, here's how the financing would work in order to maintain the 50-50 split. Now, upon satisfaction of all the contingencies up here, half, who's now made a purchase agreement on the building, will assign the NMC building purchase agreement to the holding entity up here. Upon satisfaction of the contingencies, the holding entity would then purchase the NMC building. Okay? And then ultimately, the holding entity will lease the building back to the library for $1 a year. Okay? So that's how the building ownership comes into play. Financing the project, again, a little bit of reiteration. The project would cost $10 million, $5 million from the partners, $5 million from donors or qualified commitments. Large part of our discussion has been, what do you mean? How do we know that we've actually got a qualified commitment there? So we've defined that term as it's a written commitment of funds over a defined period of time, not to exceed 5 years, from an established foundation, corporation, or a municipality, because there is one municipality who's thinking about contributing money, or 95% of individual donors. The practical aspect here is for anyone who's ever done fundraising, when foundations, corporations, or in this case, a governmental entity, when they make a commitment, you can work off the assumption that it's going to happen. It's the nature of the beast. When you have individual contributions or individual contributors to donations, you know that you're going to not collect some of that, and about 5% will fall through. Okay, so that's why we've only allowed 95% of those donations to count. Okay, and this is very important because it speaks to the issue of when do we know if the foundation has raised the $4 million, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, the other thing that is in this major capital project proposal is the project may cost more than $10 million. In other words, they can spend more, but only if half raises more than $5 million on their part. The municipalities raise $5 million. If you want to go beyond that, you got to do it through donations. Now, in terms of the financing, the bottom here is probably the most significant area of discussion we've had and it all focuses on the issue of how do you maintain the 50-50 that was originally proposed back in February. All right. First of all, no public funds, even if the voters approve it, will be made available until half is raised $4 million, which we said they've got to raise by the end of next year. If the $4 million is raised by December 9, the municipality will then begin releasing matching funds on a one-to-one basis up to $5 million. Okay? So the project doesn't go until half is raised $4 million. They've also said they're going to raise an additional $1 million. And so this holds the reason for the $4 million, that's enough to buy the land, convert it, and equip it. And so you literally would have the building ready to go. Okay? It's some of the contingencies and some of the other costs that would have to wait. And each municipality will have to obviously arrange its own interim and long-term financing. There has been some discussion about, should we collectively go out and borrow the $5 million, as a multiple municipality unit. But I don't think that's really in the cards for anybody. One municipality may have dollars in some portion of their general fund that they could use for it. right now, at least, the interim as well as long-term financing is up to each one to handle it as they see fit. Some may want to use bonds, some may want to use more conventional borrowing. Okay, again, I'm continuing with the highlights of this agreement. The governing board of the holding entity would consist of one person from each municipality. And again, this is working off the assumption that everything is approved in the project as a go, and the voters have said yes, and we've raised the money, and on and on and on. One person from each municipality would be appointed by the mayor, village president, town chair, and confirmed by the appropriate boards. During construction, half would have one non-voting member on that board. Okay, obviously because they're raising $5 million of the 10, didn't seem inappropriate. And then the board has agreed that they will not make a significant change in the library project without consulting with the half representative. Okay, that prevents the board from saying, okay, we've approved a $10 million project, we decide we're not going to remodel the first and third floors. We're just going to do the second floor. Radically changes the project. Okay. Project coordination, there will be a project manager hired and directed by the holding entity. Not terribly unlike what we did here in the village. Since we were ultimately responsible, we had a building management committee. We would hire a project manager to do that for us. Then the agreement also says that it's agreed by the partners that the annual operating budget after construction will be $1,150,000 per year, which includes capital replacement costs. So they've got their day-to-day operating, plus they've also got to look at the fact that periodically they're going to have to replace roofs, windows, plumbing, electrical, that kind of stuff. So that's now a part of the operating cost. And their lease would be a 25-year lease for $1 per year, and all the costs would be included in the annual operating budget. Moving on to what are the contingencies. This says, okay, in spite of everything we just said in the document, all the partners, these are contingencies, otherwise the deal is off. All the partners have to approve the capital agreement by September 20th. Both referendum questions must be approved by voters at each municipality. So that's a total of 8 questions where you have to get a yes on. Half has to have their $4 million raised by December 31st, 2009. Now, at our last meeting, which was Monday, we'll be meeting again tomorrow morning. The 4 partners, when we met, we had originally said, you got to have this done by September 30th because that ties in with our budgeting process. Okay? And we need to know, for the purposes of doing the 2010 budget, is this project a go or not a go? We were then made aware that for a lot of foundations, a lot of corporations, they collect donation requests, contribution requests during the first 9 months of the year. They then spend the 4th quarter where the staff sorts those into, yes, these fit our criteria, these don't. And then sometime either in like November, first part of December, they then take it to the approving entity of the foundation and decide which ones they're going to bless. And a lot of those decisions don't come until December, and then they spend the money in the following year. Okay? So we moved this out to December 31st. I'm not sure where the group tomorrow will come out on this issue, of which date. In other words, when does half have to have their $4 million raised? They have a challenging target to raise $4 million between now and the end of next year. From a budget and planning perspective, if we did our budgets, approved them in November, and if we knew by the end of December, what we'd have to do is recast the budget and do what's called a revised budget, or an amended budget, I'm sorry. So I'm not as concerned about this date, because it would also imply that the residents have approved doing And then the other thing is half will have assigned, and the holding entity will have accepted the NMC purchase agreement, right? It could be, that you would hope it would never happen, that half had some terms and conditions within the purchase agreement that the holding entity looks at and says, we're not gonna buy this. Okay? So, those are kind of like the 4 fallback contingencies, is what- even if everything else goes well, if these 4 aren't met, the deal's still off. Okay? Okay. The referendum questions. Now, this is absent the legalese. Okay? The questions the taxpayers will eventually be asked to answer. Can the village borrow $675,500 to fund its portion of the proposed library project? This will cost you about $13.92 per 100,000 of assessed value for about 20 years. Because that's about, we assume it'll be a 20-year note. Can the village increase the levy by $85,379 per year indefinitely to cover the cost of operating the proposed library project? Okay? Those are the 2 questions that everybody's going to be asked. A no vote for either or both of these questions by any municipality will terminate this project. Okay? Projected timetable, probably best guess timetable, who knows? September of 2008, we approved the joint library agreement, which needs to be approved anyway, totally independent of the project, of the capital project. But we'd also like to approve the capital project, then at least that's done, okay? November 2008, the voters would approve both referendum questions. And obviously, this projected timetable says, okay, if everything goes well. If that happens, then from November of '08 to December of '09, half is engaged in fundraising. They got to come up with at least $4 million. Their target is 5. Okay, and they need 4 in order for the municipalities to release any of the funds. In December, if that being accomplished, then where they've got their $4 million, we've got our $5 million in the bank. We would then purchase. Then there would be a purchase of the NMC building, which would be the beginning of initial debt commitment, payments starting in 2010. From about December till June, which is about a 6-month period, you would finalize the architectural and engineering drawings associated with the project. From about July through September 2010, the bids would be released, then the project would be sent out for bid, released, reviewed. So probably in about 4th quarter 2010, you'd commence construction, which would now require freeing up of more capital dollars. And then in 3rd or 4th quarter of 2011, you'd have occupancy. So you'd have partial operating costs for that year. And in all of 2012, you'd have complete occupancy. This is where I started. It says this is a complex, multifaceted project for a whole lot of reasons. Some of which are here, some of which I've probably overlooked. Obviously, the economic environment in which this whole project is being proposed, there have been better ones, 3 or 4 years ago. So right now, I have no idea as to what the appetite is for people on a project like this. If the project goes as proposed, Hudson area would get a $10 million library building for $5 million. Now, by any test, that's a pretty good deal. That will cost more to operate per year, as would any new library. I mean, no matter what you buy. If you build something bigger, it's probably going to cost you something more, just in terms of operating costs. And it's going to carry with it a corresponding increase in taxes. Okay? There is no free lunch. And that's all I've got. Now, in that document that you have, page 10 got goofy on my computer. And so I have, and it printed really big numbers if you look at page 10. I have a corrected page 10, what it's supposed to look like up here. So, could I ask you to just grab those off the back page? If you look at page 10, see it's kind of goofy? Mm-hmm. All right. Now, any questions on that? Ha!
Take a breath.
Nice job. Wow.
Larry, I came into here with a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, and I think you answered every one of them. I feel really good about this now.
You don't drink enough.
I know.
Well, I mean, I try to look at this from a taxpayer perspective as well as from a elected municipal official perspective. But at the end of the day, since this thing is gonna go to referendum, people have to know, what's the project, what's it gonna look like, and what's it gonna cost? And am I prepared to sign up for that? So, there's an awful lot of work that's gone into the mechanics and the language and financing, and by and large, most people don't care about that. It's what's it gonna mean to me, okay, when I go into that voting booth, okay? And if you go back to this one, it says for everybody in North Hudson, and this could be different somewhere else, obviously, because our numbers are not necessarily identical to the other municipalities by any means. It's going to cost you somewhere between $37.50 and $375 a year to do this, just depending upon your assessed value of your property. And we're using the 2008 assessed values because we don't have manufacturing. We happen to know what those numbers are. Okay. So, Susie, do you want to add anything?
I do, Larry. I applaud you for all this information. You did an excellent job in reviewing the difficult task you've had at hand. The four municipal partners and what they've been doing these last number of weeks in putting together the joint library agreement and now the master capital project has been phenomenal, and they've been working really hard behind the scenes to make this all happen. When we went to referendum in April, we asked the question to the taxpayers, is this something that you're interested in? And they told us that they were. So we moved forward with that. And now in November, we're going to ask them the question again with more facts and figures than we had the first time around. So we're excited about the project as we were back in April, and we'll let the voters decide.
All right. Now, in terms of dealing with the issues that we need to do, what I'd like to do is to make a motion to approve the revised joint library agreement. That's simply the agreement that establishes the relationship that has existed for these many years. So I would entertain a second to that motion.
Second. Rest of the report.
I'll give the first one to Colleen. You can get the next one.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone have any questions on the joint library agreement in terms of what's involved with that? Okay. All right. Then we'll do a roll call vote on that. And I certainly happen to support that. I think that's an agreement which, the clarification of which is long overdue. The original agreement there was nothing wrong with it at the time. It just never anticipated the kinds of evolution that's occurred within the four communities over the last 14 years. So, we'll start over here. Joe?
Yep.
Jim?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Larry, yes. Sandra?
Yes.
And Mark?
Yes.
So that's nothing on a roll call, okay? The next item is the MCPP, which is the major capital proposal. The only thing I'll point out is in that language, it does state that the board, that the foundation has until December 31st to raise the funds, rather than September, as we had a couple of weeks ago. I don't know whether that's a material change or not, very candidly. I mean, if they're gonna get their end of the deal done, they're gonna need 12 months to get it done, that's for sure. Because that's a big task. And if the residents want to do it, from a referendum perspective, I certainly don't have any trouble from an operational and municipal planning perspective in, having to adjust the budget after the fact. The numbers are going to be known. It's not like it's a totally unknown set of changing conditions. So I would make the motion to approve the major capital project proposal and would entertain a second for that so we can have discussion on that.
Second.
And you've got that, okay? Sandra?
Yep.
Okay. As I said, that major capital project proposal, its primary objective is to lay out how would this thing be financed, terms and conditions. How do we ensure that the original 50-50 split takes place? And how do we make sure that the municipalities, at the end of the day, don't get left holding the bag? That's kind of what it does. And so that has gone through an awful lot of iterations. To the extent that residents want to do this project and everybody else wants to do this project, this is a pretty good proposal in terms of saying, we're not going to, even though voters have approved it, we've borrowed the money, we're not going to release it until you've raised $4 million. That's enough to basically build the building and furnish it and get it ready to go. Okay? And to the extent you want to spend more than $10 million, then you got to go raise more additional dollars. Okay? And you can't get more than 4 until you raise more than 4, because it's a 1-to-1 match. Okay? Questions or thoughts about that? Does that agreement make sense to you, or? Yes.
My question, I may have just misunderstood this, but is it critical that that particular agreement be approved tonight?
It doesn't have to be approved tonight. In fact, I know the city of Hudson will be taking it up tonight under what's called first hearing, which means they won't vote on it. They'll just bring it up, discuss the issue, and then, but they also have the advantage of meeting again in 2 weeks, and all of their discussions are televised. I mean, both their meetings. This is our only meeting. I would just as soon not call another special meeting of the board this month, because that represents additional cost to the village, and why should we do that? I would rather work off the assumption that we approve it, as it is, unless anyone wants to debate that date change. We can certainly do that, or anything else that's in there. And I realize that's a fairly complex document. What was your concern, Tom?
My concern was that I think that might be discussed in tomorrow morning.
Yes.
And, Jeff and I have tried to talk since, last week, discussing politics, and we haven't done that. So, I'm just not sure that that's going to, the general concept of 50-50 and the major points that we've talked about, I think, are in review. I don't see any change to that, but there could be some changes to the structure of the entity and how financing all that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to-
I know that you have. I think Tom, you have raised the issue of will it be a tenants in common entity, which is a fair question. We've been kind of debating that from the beginning, and we kind of came out at that as a conclusion, because it seemed to be the best alternative. If there's a better one, very honestly, I'm not so sure I would consider that a material change. If instead of doing tenants in common, we elected to do create some kind of a separate nonprofit corporation to do it.
I think what we were anticipating is that it may be under what used to be 6630, which is now 660301. That, and again, that may not be material. The critical thing is that the municipalities themselves are going to be the ones that would own this building and this real estate. I think that's going to remain the same. But I guess just so the board is aware, there may be some fair amount of tweaking to that, or there may not be, but that could happen yet.
The tweaking, just to paraphrase it, just make sure you and I are on the same wavelength. I would characterize this as if all of us here decided we're going to buy a business, we would have to decide, do we want to incorporate as an LLC? Do we want to incorporate as an S Corp? Do we want to just do it as a freestanding corp? Whatever, one of the options available to us. Now, each one of those carries with it, a little bit different ramifications within the private sector. But, from my perspective, if the terms and conditions that I've summarized here in terms of who's going to own this thing, and where are the finances, I do not anticipate any of that changing.
Right.
Okay?
I agree.
So if it goes from being holding entity LLC to holding entity S Corp, I could care less. That's my personal view. Now, is that principally what your concerns
Yes.
were as well?
Yep,
Okay,
I agree.
okay.
You would need to approve it with those changes.
Oh, yeah, Gloria had also noted that in
Page 3.
the actual handout that's in your book, that's in finance,
Yes.
gets late and I forget where things are. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. In the major capital, oh,
Yes, contract. That's not the right one. Keep going.
let's keep going.
Yep.
No, I know
The
it is.
whole thing. There.
Oh, it is? Oh, see, I wasn't expecting double space. Oh, you're right. Oh, I didn't change it in here. Okay. If you look at page 3, for Village of North Hudson, the percentage stays the same. Again, all the numbers are up here would correlate here. These numbers don't correlate. The maximum amount of our funding would be, in your book it says 675, 676. Okay, that should be 675, 500. Okay, so just strike the 676. And in the minimum amount, which is, if the, that'd be the $4 million that the foundation would raise, matched by the $4 million, which could be the end of the project, by the way. Could be the end of funding. It currently says 540,576, and the correct number there, Gloria, was what?
I'm sorry.
I have it in my other paper. if you need it.
540, 400.
400, okay. And the other number, 135, 100, stays the same. And that would then add up to the total cost of the project. And as you and I were going through it, I think that was it. Sandra, you were saying before you had some questions, obviously, I'm sure a lot of people did. What was your biggest one? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, I'm not sure. I appreciated that you reiterated several times the safety net issues.
Mhm.
I guess that's my biggest concern with looking at numbers this big. And,
Oh, yeah.
because it is a commitment, a financial commitment, not just for us, but for the taxpayers, so
And there may even be a larger one, which is, floating below the surface, which is, we're taking on, I mean, if we do the project, we're taking on a 40,000 square foot building. That's a big enchilada.
And we had talked before about the roles of each entity, and so that was a concern we spelled out real nicely.
I have one question.
Mhm.
Back to what you were talking about earlier, as far as the agreement versus approving it tonight versus not, or whatever. Can the board approve the concept of the project in order to get it onto the referendum without approving this actual agreement, and approve the agreement later when we have all of it worked out?
Good.
Okay.
As far as I know, Tom, I think everybody knows Tom Schumacher, who's with the firm Baki Norman. Okay. Which also, Bill is with our legal representative, so Bill is asking these questions, or Tom is asking these questions on our behalf, I think. Do you see a material concern?
My only sense is I just didn't have that understanding that that particular agreement needed to be done tonight. My understanding was that, it needed, as Gloria kind of said, the concept and the things that you've pointed out as the principal matters. We wanted to make sure that everybody, or that group, the representatives that have been meeting since May, wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page for that. But I didn't, at least it wasn't my understanding that that particular agreement was critical for tonight. What I understand critical for timing purposes were the ones that you're going to come to, because those have dates relative to when the election's going to be, and it was important that those be adopted. But I thought that with respect to that, the MPCC, whatever that, I never can remember what it stands for. I have to look each time. But whether that, I just didn't understand that needed, and so that's why I brought that up. That wasn't my understanding.
Certainly when the agreement of the four of us, or the understanding that the four of us have had over the last several weeks, is before we can talk about approving, anything relative to taking this thing to referendum, we have to get conceptual and factual agreement between the four of us as to how this creature is going to operate, how we're going to fund it, may establish all the relationships between the four of us, as well as our relationship to the board. How do we create the safety net that says somehow, at least in the short term, we don't find that we've taken on accidentally this massive amount of expense that we hadn't otherwise intended. But we've been working off the assumption that all of us would, for those of us who were meeting only one time in
September.
the month of September, would approve it at our September sessions.
Okay.
And then that's one more thing we can tick off of here's what we need to get done if we want to take this thing to referendum.
Okay.
So.
All right.
All right. So I take it from your nodding that you would not object if we were to approve this.
I'm not objecting. I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. Bill?
You could always change it.
And we do. Now, we will be meeting tomorrow to discuss, and there may well be something that comes up as a result of the city council meeting tonight. They may identify some issue that says, well, we absolutely categorically can't live with this, whatever it is. Or, we've got to change it substantively. Now, if that happens, then I would feel compelled, obviously, to bring this document back. And we'd have to do it in the form of a special board meeting in September. So let's see, where am I at right now? Right now, I have a motion and a second to approve the Hudson area, or the Hudson area major capital project proposal with the changes that noted. Are there any other comments or questions on this? Okay.
I do have just a couple of questions.
Sure.
if
Absolutely.
that's Okay.
Absolutely.
The funding, this $4 million that's being raised, obviously there's a fee incurred for doing this, and we've talked about it. Is this gross or net money at this point in December 2009? And I'm assuming to raise the ultimate $5 million, it will probably require a fundraising effort of $5.5 or $6 million to pay the fundraising company.
Of the $10 million project includes the fundraising costs. Okay, so it's considered a project cost?
That is in that 190 or whatever.
Yeah,
that
that 1.9 million?
Yeah, 1.9 million, that is part of that. Okay,
Yep.
thank you very much for clarifying that. Yeah, obviously it's a wonderful effort on everybody's behalf. It's hard sitting here being on Finance Committee after you're battling to trying to balance a budget, make sure that all of the residents still have a road that doesn't have cracks in it, and look at things like operating costs and understand how people are still going to be able to provide the service that's expected of them in a library 10 years from now without increases in this, and battle it. But, for the most part, it's a very, very nice, nicely presented piece. It's come a long way.
Mhm.
I have nothing else at this point. Go ahead.
No, I didn't have anything.
Larry, I did have one other thing. It's
Oh, sure.
kind of inconsequential, but I did notice in the, let's see, in one of these parts, the voting allowance for the school board. Was that something that the joint library had before? And, okay,
As a part of the joint library agreement,
yeah,
they are by state required to be on the board,
okay, that's what I wondered.
Yeah.
Okay.
but they only get one. It's kind of an interesting state statute. If you read it, there's a lot of, why would you do that? But you can say that about a lot of state statutes.
Yeah.
So. And Tom and Bill probably see that a lot more than the rest of us do, since that's how they make their living. Okay. Okay, so we'll start on this end.
Sure.
Okay, we'll do a roll call again. If you're in favor of the capital project, indicate by saying yes, otherwise say no. Joe?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Larry, yes. Sandra?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now we have to approve what I call the procedural issues. The first one is Resolution 208-7. And for at least the purposes of the viewing audience, I want to read that. Because as I mentioned before, procedurally, first we're going to approve this resolution, or at least vote on this resolution, which is authorizing the Village of North Hudson to not exceed $675,000 in general obligation bonds or promissory notes for a library project. Say, well, why would we as a board vote on that tonight when the residents haven't had a chance to? Okay? Well, I can't answer that question. It doesn't make sense, but that's the way the process has to work. The board has to take an action before you can take it to referendum. So Resolution 208-07 reads, resolved that the Village of North Hudson, St. Croix County, Wisconsin, borrow an amount not to exceed $675,500 by issuing general obligation bonds or promissory notes for the public purpose of financing a library project, consisting of paying the village's portion of the cost of acquiring, renovating, and equipping a new Hudson area joint library facility to be located at 700 First Street in Hudson, Wisconsin. So this proposal, or this resolution, is also very specific. does not carry over. If for any reason this project dies, this resolution has no effect. So I would make the motion to adopt Resolution 208-07. And is there a second for purposes of discussion?
I'll second that.
Okay. Questions?
This all has to stay intact for 1 year for this, before we can acquire this property? I mean, basically, if I'm getting this all right and that we adopt this, everything goes through, this all hinges on the fact that nobody else comes along and buys this property until December of '09.
If somebody comes along, buys that property, all bets are off.
And the second safety net to everybody is that the $4 million has to be there at that time. At that point, we all ante up and we go forward. God, it's a long
And
time.
the safety, I mean, the language which is in the capital agreement that we just approved says, even if we've already got our money borrowed, so the voters have approved it, so we've gone out and we've struck our best deal with the lending markets. So we've got the money, in essence, sitting in Gloria's purse, okay? But she's not allowed to spend it until they have $4 million. Okay?
Okay.
And if anything happens to the project, all bets are off. Because everything is tied to this capital project, that building. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Some people don't like the idea that a project of this magnitude is tied to one building, but setting that aside, it is.
Just a question that I just can't help but asking. Say that some philanthropist comes along in April of '09 and pools up $4 million and says, go to it. Will this project get moved up till April, or do we have to wait until December to execute this according to this document?
No, we would be prepared to execute once the voters have approved it, number one.
Okay.
That would then give us authorization to borrow the money. The capital agreement doesn't specify the time frame, other than we're not going to keep this money open forever. Okay, we're not going to keep this arrangement open forever. You got to raise the $4 million by no later than December. So if Uncle Sned came by and dropped $4 million on the table in April, we would already have the money.
We would go forward at that point.
We would then borrow our share and we could start.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Tom, would you disagree with that?
No, I agree. We like the address of them.
I'm sorry, he's a family heirloom. Can't give him out. So.
Slowly getting all my questions answered. Cool. Thank you very much for that clarification.
All right, resolution.
And, excuse me, Larry.
No, we finished that. No, we didn't. We didn't vote on that, did we?
Right, and Kathy is going to need to take the yays and the nays and the abstaining, so we need to move slowly, and if she's got any questions, please
Okay.
stop us. Okay?
Okay. It's okay, so now we'll be voting on approval of Resolution 208-07. Says we're going to go out and borrow $675,000 without even talking to the voters. I love that. Okay. Weird. All right, we'll start on this end again. Joe?
Yes.
Pause.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Oh, you got it?
If they're all.
Well, we'll see.
Then, yeah.
All right.
Right.
Jim?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Larry, yes. Sandra?
Yes.
Mark? Okay,
That wasn't a mm-hmm instead of a yes.
not sure.
It's noted duly.
I'm running out of interest.
Okay. That's right, it'll start accumulating fast. Resolution 208 authorizes the village to exceed the levy limit on an ongoing basis for library costs, okay? again, for purposes of keeping this thing moving, I'll make the motion that we approve Resolution 208-8, a resolution authorizing the Village of North Hudson to exceed the levy limits specified under Section 66.0602 on an ongoing basis, which means forever, for library costs, discussion, and possible approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. I think Colleen came first. Now, do keep in mind, realistically, you know, we had said that from a levy limits perspective, just to make sure there's, I don't want anyone to say we're playing any games with any of these numbers. Operating costs. What the agreement says is that for the first year of operations, the operating cost, the portion of the operating cost for the village will be this, 85,000 more than it is today. It could be less, okay? It could be less, but it can't be more than that, okay? Now, in terms of the operating cost, which they've said is going to go from 609 to 1,150,000, you know, for the library as a whole. 5 years out, you know, will that number still be at 1,150,000, or will it be 1,200,000, 1,400,000? Okay. So I mean, yeah, the levy, or I mean, I should say, the referendum process will, you know, this is our best attempt trying to nail it down for an immediate period of time. But people are also signing up for that number, you know, for 85,000 more going forward.
Larry, just with respect to that, that comment, that 85,000, and the budget that reflects of that 1,150,000.
Right, it's locked in at that, isn't it?
That budget's locked, because you and I talked about this, that
That's
budget
right.
is locked in, so if it does go to 1,200,000 or 1,400,000, it can only do that if all 4 municipalities agree to that increase in the
Right.
budget. And so otherwise, even if they need to go to 1,200,000, they're going to be at 1,150,000 if one of the municipalities says
Right,
no.
thank you. Thank you. Okay. Right. Okay, we have, all right. So we have a motion and a second. Any more questions on this one?
That probably addresses my earlier question, then, that we won't be confronting this budget question annually with what happens if it goes up. It can't go up
Not without approval.
without our approval. Okay.
And this override is an ongoing thing, I think, as Larry kind of came in on the tail end of that, as the levy limit statute expires next year in November, and who knows what's going to happen with that. But that this is for the operating budget, and that operating budget, as Larry said, may contain some capital portion of that budget, but it's the capital portion that deals more with, like the furnace went out or the roof needs to be repaired. It's not the major capital project, which is a building project. So it's the override is for the operating portion of the library's budget, and it's an ongoing thing. And as Larry said, it may be 2011 or 12 before we need to address that. And one other comment, that with respect to that, because the question was raised, well, can we just start levying that next year and we'll put that money away and then we won't have to borrow as much? And we cannot do that, because when we're dealing with the override, we're saying we're passing that for the operating budget. We're not passing that so we have some reduced debt level down the road that may or may not happen.
Right. Good point. Okay. We will do a roll call vote then on Resolution 208-8 to exceed the levy limit. We'll start again on this end. Joe? Jim?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Larry, yes. Sandra?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Resolution 20809 is the resolution providing for whereby the board instructs the clerk to have to call a referendum election. Just so happens it'll be coincident with the November 7th general government election. Happens to be Good for you, otherwise you'd have to do this whole thing twice. Okay. All right, so again, for purposes of discussion, I'll make the motion to approve Resolution 208-09. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Questions? All right, if not, then we'll, I'll wait for a few minutes. But, no? Okay. Then we'll start. If you're in favor, say yes. Joe?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Lori, yes. Sandra?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Part of Resolution 20809 was also attachments, or Exhibit A, Exhibit B, and Exhibit C. Those were simply public announcements. A and B are public announcements. C is what does the ballot look like? Okay. So I think we are done with that whole issue in front of the library for tonight. Okay. All right, so Finance Committee is done.
Okay.
Public Works Committee recommendations.
We have one.
We have one.
Please, the president, I will. If you look at your handouts for in
Thank you, Mark.
Public Works, there's a fold-out section there that says 2008, the Ridges Phase 2. And if you would go back to, I think the third page back is probably the page that will follow along here. Essentially, the developer, which is Derrick Construction, has decided to complete the subdivision in 3 phases rather than 2. And a lot of that has to do with market conditions for housing, new housing. And so, instead of phase 2 completing the rest of it, he wants to break it down into a smaller portion. And you can see on that page that I mentioned to you, there's phase 2 and there's lots 54 through, I think, 72 on there. There's a dotted line around there, and then there's a big block, says the project area, where most of the work is going to be completed here. And all that is completing the sanitary sewer line and the water line down to the pumps that are already in the ground down there that we did a couple of years ago with the Cratley Lane Extension Project. So he wants to hook up that line, and essentially there's a pond up there that's right between lot 69 and 70 that they're going to increase the height of, if you will, for holding runoff water. And so that essentially is what this is about. That's what they intend to do. They're not talking about any other completion on phase 3. They had a civil engineer that actually, JEO Consulting has drawn this up. They've reviewed it with Cedar Corporation, our engineer. And they've also got agreement with the City of Hudson Water Utility Director and the Public Works Director here at.
That was going to be my only question, because I got a call from the city a month ago.
They met.
And DC this is the first time that a water project hasn't been designed by the city. And so I'm sure that's the case.
But when we did Cratley, they didn't design that extension project.
I can't remember how that went.
Well, Cedar designed it, and then they probably approved it.
And as long as DC has looked at this and said,
They have.
this looks fine, he was concerned about the elevations and creating the appropriate loops.
Yeah, let's see, on July 31st, they met with the city utilities and Public Works and the consulting firm here. And I think they revised the construction plans based on their comments on the July 31 meeting to to reflect that on these drawings that we have here on August 18th. So essentially, that's what it is, that's what we're trying to approve, are these drawings, so that they can complete phase 2 and open up for sale, you know, however many lots that is, another 18 or 19 lots.
Approval.
And, yeah, thank you.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I think the motion should be to approve the new phase 2 plans for the ridges dated August 18th, 2008, if you would, Kathy.
Who had the second for that? Tim did? Okay.
That, just for a point of clarification, that change has no impact on the developers' agreements.
No, and it's all, and the costs are all picked up by the developer. The village, village picks up nothing here.
Okay. All right. Anyone have any questions for this? If not, it's not a spending issue, it's just simply approval. So all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Carried. Public safety. Does anybody from public safety have any relevant update? Okay. Public welfare.
Public welfare met, and we've already approved the animal warden increase. Bill Nicolai and I worked briefly to try to put a letter together that would address the residents' concerns with houses that go into foreclosure or not being maintained properly. And basically, we came up with a letter that we will recommend to the, well, Gloria and I will work together. We don't need an approval of anything, but basically sending this out immediately upon the first indication of a problem, so that the entity that owns the property is notified if we have to go in and make improvements or anything upkeep to keep it up to the existing codes that are in place. As time goes on, we will modify those codes as we need. Is that correct, sort of, Bill? But right now,
Right.
this letter will suffice.
When a foreclosure proceeding starts, who is the owner of the property?
The owner of the property is the person on the deed. The actual deed transfer on a foreclosure does not take place until there's a court hearing at the end of the process. And the judge at the hearing approves the sheriff's sale and all the other prior steps. So that is a long process. Now, what can happen in foreclosures is, and this can get tricky, is that people sometimes abandon a lot earlier. And then, but then there are ways that that can be addressed, but that could be a snag for you, that technically the person still owns it, but they moved out a month ago and it's still in the process.
It was more curiosity. Okay.
And that has been the problem with sending the letters, is we sometimes don't know where it is at in the process, and so then we're making phone calls and trying to locate who the person is that gets the letter. And that's usually the biggest issue.
You could, if you want, you could check CCAP, and it's not very exact on CCAP, but it can help you find out where the process is. If you're familiar with CCAP.
Yeah, we've used it before.
Do we have the ability, saying an assumption that John Doe has moved out of his home and has no intention to go back, the process is in action, we have to go in as a village and make a repair to contact the lending institution that ultimately will be in charge of it? Is there
Your
anything we
notice,
can
your
do?
notice is to the owner of record.
Oh,
And until that's transferred at the end of the process,
okay.
it's the owner of record.
So if we had to do a $3,000 repair and
No.
we notified the
No.
owner of record,
Well, but one other clarification is that when a foreclosure action is started, there's a document called a lis pendens filed, which says that such and such bank has got this action pending. So their name is on record. So you can, if you check the title, you can get both notified.
thank you. It will need a little bit more work, but.
And I'm assuming recovery, ultimately, if we had to do work, $3,000,
It goes on the tax roll.
we put it on the taxes. Eventually, somebody buys it, even as a distressed property, they may buy it for a great price, but they still have to pay the taxes.
But that gets paid first.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We just want to come up with something that's efficient,
Yeah.
not too time consuming, and keeps all of the residents happy that live around these houses.
As we discussed last month, I mean, we still have some work to do with respect to
I think
other
the oth-
neglected properties.
The other issue that we're going to look at, we haven't, is the concept of standards for just properties in general and enforcement by the village, even if they're not in foreclosure.
Well, and see, we don't usually have a problem with those. The way the process has worked in the past is Public Works will go out and make a list of properties that either have their grass too long, have let things go. They come back, he comes back, we send out a letter giving him the 10 days.
Yeah.
Who looks at commercial property?
It's
Is
the
that
problem.
included in there?
Hold on for just a second. The problem becomes the foreclosures. Those are the issues, not normal processing of somebody let their grass grow too long. But, okay, go ahead, Mark.
We've got 4 that are perpetual annual.
Well, and
offenders.
though, yeah,
Do they look at commercial and residential equally?
I believe they do. Mhm.
They don't do it very well. I'd like
Some-
to-
But we don't
Well,
have a
that's a
health
good question,
officer
though.
that goes
No,
around
I
and
do
does
want-
that either.
It's not a complaint, because one of the property owners is my brother, but coming in 35 on the left-hand side between Mama Maria's and what Freedom owns is, they could mow that a little bit. It's getting kind of crummy. But I'm saying when you talk about going to check land, and I can talk to Gary myself, but it'd be nice than rather to come from me or call Dave Erickson or something, that send him a gentle letter to clean up, so when you talk about cleaning up, I don't see it.
Well, and what happens in some communities that has a health officer who goes around and does all that on a continual basis, but what you have here is a public works department and an administrative office that try to slip this stuff in as we're processing everything else.
Yeah, not being overly
No.
critical. I was just saying if we're addressing it, I'd like to include that.
Register that?
Sure.
Okay.
Cool, sounds good. Well, we will get this resolved. It's an issue that unfortunately isn't
It's
gonna
not
go away.
wonderful.
The thing that I'd like to convey to anybody who's watching this, geez, is that if they can notify us what's going on, it sure does make life wonderful. With that being said, the only other issues we've got covered is, I would like all of the board chairs to remember that we do have our XM voice messaging in place if there is to be any public works projects, any public notifications that need to be addressed. Please do let me know with a day or two notice. I'll try to get something out if it's helpful, or if the grass in the ditches is getting too long or whatever. But
I think we got one from about waste management for garbage pickup this week, isn't it, one day delayed?
Yeah, that's a separate, that's from
that's a
the-
separate one. They've got their own too.
It's working.
Okay.
Cool. Pretty
Waste
much.
Management did a call? Yeah. Okay, I haven't gotten any of these calls. We had talked about that before.
Right.
I didn't get this one either.
I didn't either, so I'm gonna contact Mark from
Well, they're
Waste
mad at you.
Management and have them update their list. And I'll put that on my list. Cool.
Yeah. Is that
Okay.
it?
Could be.
Shoot. Meanwhile, I have my garbage out on my, got rained on.
Okay, Park Board?
Along with the phase 2 of the Ridges development, we're still trying to get the park set up there. And hopefully now that I think they've gotten approval, or all the things that need to be done by the DNR, we can go ahead and start getting the park in there. The only thing we need to vote on or approval for tonight is to purchase and install a new sign from Lebo Signs for Woodcrest Park at a cost not to exceed $450. Included in your packet was a black and white photo. The actual park sign would be in color.
They all got colored.
Okay, so that's your motion?
That's my
Is there
motion.
a second?
I'll second. I have a question, Colleen. Which one is Woodcrest Park? What street is that on?
It's on 10th, and then it also goes down to Cedar and Prairie, where Cedar turns into Prairie.
Oh, it's the funny one.
Yeah.
It's kind of, okay.
But the sign is looking kind of crummy, so we wanted a new one.
I don't know the proper means of telling you this, but the park on Helen and just past Bald Eagle, there's a major crack and it's leaning a little bit. My dog noticed this last weekend, so I thought I'd
That's
pass
Eagle
that on.
Woods.
Which park is that?
Eagle Woods.
Eagle Woods? Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion and a second to spend some money on a sign. Is there on this end again?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Colleen?
Yes.
Larry, yes. Sandra?
Yes.
Mark? Anything else, Colleen?
No.
New business from the board or staff, just for purposes of the general audience. We had the budget on the agenda for tonight. It was preliminary. The only thing that I wanted to make people aware of is that our intent would be to approve the budget at the November meeting, which would be November 6th, won't be November 4, which is normally scheduled. And we will probably have some finance committee and/or others, or possibly full board meetings between now and then. To get that done will be challenging. The initial draft says we've got about a $200,000 problem, which hopefully is doable. And the only other thing that I'd want to just make sure to clarify is, you know, in that presentation, I hope I did not give the impression that I am either for or against that project. Okay, my goal is to try and present it as best I can in terms of, here's what's on the table, and if we go with it, here's what it's gonna cost, and how do we want to do it. Okay. Other than that, I don't have anything.
I was just gonna ask.
Other than, and just make sure everybody is aware, Gloria will be out for about a week, possibly longer. She claims she won't be, but she might be for medical reasons. Starting tomorrow. So no more calls to the village hall during the day. Includes you, John. Ghostbusters.
The only question, or the comment I have, or question, is are we going to, as long as the majority of the board members are here, are we going to set a time for a September third week or fourth week budget meeting?
Sure.
Finance, I'll call it, or do you want it to be the entire board? Most committee heads are on finance, so
Well, they all are.
right, I think that's the purpose. Except for you probably.
What's the
because of
preference?
work.
I mean, there's only two of you that aren't.
I'd say you finance guys do it.
Pardon? Bring it to you
And then we'll
after.
catch you later.
Huh?
And then we'll catch up with you later.
Okay.
What are, you're worried about what to call it?
No. The question is it finance, which is four of the seven of us, or is it the whole board, all seven?
I prefer you just do the four of you, because I can always go to the meeting if I want to.
That's true. Finance will be.
Anybody can go to the meeting, by the way, just for,
That's
If
true.
you know you're coming to the meeting, it becomes a board meeting.
but see, if I
Just
don't
to
go, then I don't
clarify.
feel so guilty.
Okay, let's give it a day.
Let's plan on not going.
Go
A
ahead.
day and time.
Pick a day.
About the 23rd.
What day of the week is that?
Tuesday.
All right.
That should work. The only issue, I think I may have a TMDL meeting for that shareholder thing that I'm going to these meetings for total maximum load for Lake Malibu. Let's write it down for the 23rd. When I get home tonight, look at my computer. If that is the case, I'll email you tonight. And, I wouldn't be able to make it if I have to go to that. That's 7
Okay,
o'clock.
and it doesn't
clearly.
have to be, it could be at 5, or, I mean, I don't
Oh,
know
yeah,
your
that's true.
We
schedule
could do it, yeah.
during the day, but I mean,
Yeah.
I know you, some are
We
working.
could do it earlier. I mean, we could start at 3.
Sure, yeah, it's Clear Lake at 7, so if we could do it, it'd start at 3 or something. If
I mean,
that's-
we probably won't finish.
Right. Get
But
started.
at least it gives us a chance to start banging on it.
Sure,
Do you
no.
want us
One.
at 3 o'clock? Is that what I heard?
Why not?
Okay, September 23rd at 3.
Excuse me.
And we figure a couple hours first round?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Unless you just want to take the axe
Sure you
out.
don't want to go, Mark?
Okay, I have no reason to execute number 15, okay? All right, so we can skip 16, and so therefore, are we done, I'm sorry?
Oh, look at
Yes.
All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. See, who was that? Is there a second?
that. I'll second.
I was paying attention mostly.
All right, all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carried, meeting is adjourned at
Yeah.
9:07.
I have a coffee card.